Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a chapter of history that's equal parts scandal, sorrow, and awkwardly placed candles. We're heading into the smoky, stew-scented back streets of a medieval city, where walls were thin, rules thinner, and velvet curtains barely hid what was happening. We're talking about medieval brothels. Fair warning, you might not survive this. Not emotionally, not psychologically, and definitely not if you're squeamish about disease or the smell of unwashed tights. These weren't five-star inns with spa options, but that's what makes it fascinating. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like this post and follow, but only if you genuinely vibe with this content. Drop a comment with your city and the current time. I'll read them all, probably while lying in bed, questioning the course of Western civilization. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum. And let's dive in. Picture a flickering alley near the market square, reeking of overripe cheese and wet wool. There's a door with a subtle red streak. Not screaming brothel, but if you knew, you knew. Push inside, and laughter bounces off stone walls. A woman in a bright green veil beckons from a staircase, a low fire crackles, and upstairs someone groans. Not in pain. Welcome to the medieval brothel. These weren't just dens of sin tucked in shadows. They were institutions, often legal, taxed, and regulated, strategically placed near military barracks or pilgrimage routes. Cities condemned prostitution in sermons, but quietly pocketed taxes behind closed doors. Imagine a town, council wagging fingers by day and counting coins by night. In 14th century Toulouse, for example, prostitutes had to wear striped hoods, not for safety, but to mark them so no one could accidentally sin. Meanwhile, the council profited from the very brothels they regulated. Moral clarity? Not exactly. Brothels varied wildly. There were massive, city-sponsored stewhouses in London's Southwark district, basically sex malls with bathhouses attached, and tiny backroom operations with creaky cots and sour ale. But they were always loud, chaotic, and woven into the urban fabric. You'd hear music, laughter, and the occasional drunken lute solo before you saw the place. Unlike the restrained candlelight of noble homes, brothels were garish. Heavy perfumes masking body odor, embroidered cushions, and bizarre ceiling paintings of swans doing questionable things. The decor distracted from cold stone walls and scratchy linens. The people inside were just as colorful. Brothel workers, called public women, amiamuris, or single women, came from every background. Some fled abusive homes, others were sold into the trade, and a few chose it for rare independence. Scholars still debate their agency. Some argue brothels offered women a way to earn without a husband. Others point to systemic coercion. It depended on the city, decade, and person. Quirky note, some cities had safe days during religious festivals when prostitution was banned, making those the slowest, most awkward days of the year. In Avignon, brothels offered spiritual massages during bans. Spoiler, not very spiritual. As night deepens, the scene shifts. Clients trickle in, merchants, knights, scribes, even monks sneaking out in woolen habits. Some are regulars, some tourists, most drunk. They haggle in hushed tones, not for secrecy but to avoid looking cheap. Upstairs, the real business unfolds, one eye on the door, the other on a candle burning too close to the thatch. It wasn't just sex. Brothels offered conversation, laughter, music, a strange freedom for men in a violent, hierarchical world, even if paid for. Fun fact, brothels had curfews. Workers had to be inside by dusk or face fines, with city ordinances dictating their clothing and movements. Hypocrisy peaked when brothel profits funded church repairs, stained glass gleaming thanks to coins dropped on stained pillows. As morning breaks, the brothel quiets. Fires burn to embers. Perfume mixes with moldy lavender and regret. Workers in half-rolled stockings stumble downstairs for cold bread or forgotten cider. You're still here, a ghost in the corner, wondering how this became normal. Why did godly cities allow these places steps from cathedrals? Simple. Profit and control. Cities couldn't stop sin, so they taxed it with ruthless efficiency. Take Nuremberg in the 15th century, where officials ran a municipal brothel, owning the building, hiring the madam, and enforcing rules. The goal was containment. Better to keep sex work in a designated zone than let it spill into respectable areas or worse, spark affairs that mess with property rights. Property was sacred. Cities set up red light districts, mandated clothing laws, and used taxes for bridges and walls. Next time you admire a medieval town's Gothic arches, know they might have been funded by someone's wild Saturday night. In Florence, entire neighborhoods were zoned for sex work near markets and ports, supply and demand at work. If a brothel opened too close to a convent, the nuns just petitioned for a bigger wall. Publicly, brothels were condemned as moral rot, but in backrooms, city leaders signed rent contracts with madams. Some men finding prostitutes by day were clients or landlords by night. In Paris, fines from sex workers funded public fountains and sanitation. Ironic, since they were banned from using them. Quirky fact, in Bruges, brothels had curfews tied to cathedral bells, unless the bell ringer was conveniently late. Some cities even sent officials to inspect brothels for moral compliance. Historians debate if this was governance or voyeurism. The real goal was control over women, the working class, and sex itself. Humiliating laws like mandatory clothing or curfews reinforced hierarchies. Once labeled a prostitute, that identity stuck like medieval mud, even if you left the trade. In some cities, workers had to register, carrying tokens identifying them as legal sex workers. Helpful in theory, but it made them easy to fine or jail. In Venice, though, high-end courtesans like Veronica Franco could achieve celebrity, writing poetry and debating bishops, though still taxed and regulated. Step outside to the wet cobblestone street, smelling of horse dung and boiled cabbage. A cat chases a rat the size of a goblet. You're in Southwark, London's infamous red light district, just across the Thames. It wasn't under city control, but governed by the Bishop of Winchester, who preached chastity while collecting brothel rent. The women here, called Winchester Geese, were banned from living in London proper. Southwark was a self-contained zone of sin with taverns, gambling houses, and stewhouses built over bathhouses. The term stew came from soaking tubs, but the curtains hid more than steam. These women lived in limbo. They had some freedom to work and earn, but couldn't marry, wear respectable colors, or be buried in consecrated ground. The Crossbones graveyard, now under a car park, was their resting place. No headstones, just bones and whispers. Work was grueling. 5 to 15 clients a day, many rough or diseased. Workers had to smile, flatter, and play the game, knowing one bad night could mean the street. Madams, balancing profit and disaster, bribed guards and inspectors to keep things running. A rowdy brothel risked raids or burning by morally outraged townsfolk. Oddly, workers were under the bishop's protection and could sue for assault in his court. Imagine a prostitute facing a bishop who likely knew her name. Why didn't the church shut it down? Some say it contained sex work. Others point to money or fear of angering powerful clients, knights, officials, even clergy. Brothels operated in plain sight, yet were cloaked in shame, a medieval don't ask, don't tell. Workers couldn't own property, testify in court, or join guilds, but the economy needed them. Ports, merchants, and armies relied on brothels for morale. Fashion laws marked them. Striped cloaks, uncovered hair, or shoes with cut-off toes, like a reverse Cinderella warning. As the last lantern sputters out, the brothel grows cold. A barefoot worker passes bleary-eyed, and you wonder who she is and how she ended up here. Single woman was often code for prostitute in tax records and court ledgers. Without a husband or guardian, women were assumed to be in the trade, facing fines and surveillance. Poverty drove many, widows, orphans, or those who lost dowries. After plagues or wars, girls as young as 12 were taken in by brothel keepers with promises of food, only to face grim realities. Some were sold by families for a lump sum, disguised as domestic service. Yet brothels could be safer than the streets, offering a roof and community. A few women chose the life for independence, earning money without a husband. In 14th century Ghent, Elbit the weaver registered as a sex worker to escape low textile wages, trading one exploitation for another. Scholars debate if this was empowerment or despair. In villages, sex work was less formal, a widow hosting guests or a woman serving clerics. Traveling workers, posing as seamstresses or musicians, worked fairs but faced harassment as unregistered clandestines. Tokens marked legal workers but made them targets for insults or worse. Despite it all, these women built lives, sharing jokes, watching each other's children, learning tricks to manage clients. They sang, kept pet geese, and scribbled poetry in account book margins. Some formed unofficial unions, protesting abuse or demanding better pay. They weren't just victims, they were sharp, stubborn survivors. Leaving was nearly impossible. Marriage or honest work came with whispers, and redemption required years of penance. The brothel stirs as shutters slam open, onions fry in a nearby tavern, and an off-key song echoes. But the women aren't alone in running this world. Behind them are madams and pimps, pulling strings and greasing palms, often draped in too much velvet for non-bed work. Madams, especially in legal brothels, held contracts with cities or the church, balancing ledgers and power with a finesse that kept the creaky, sinful system intact. In medieval times, brothels were more than dens of vice. They were businesses, often sanctioned with licenses resembling ornate scrolls sealed with wax, granting permission to operate on streets like Church Street, provided taxes were paid quarterly and fires were avoided. The women running these establishments, known as madams, were far from amateurs. They were business managers, security supervisors, customer service reps, and sometimes bouncers. They hired workers, ensured payments were collected, and paid city officials their regulatory fees, or bribes. Some even employed lawyers. Arguing their trade offered nothing more than companionship and fine ale, with any moaning being purely theological. In larger brothels, madams wielded significant influence, holding valuable information about who visited, who paid, who begged for credit, and who cried afterward. This gossip could be sold to city officials or used to leverage better rent terms by threatening to expose a noble's proclivities. Picture a gritty, satin-draped Game of Thrones, with fewer swords and more intrigue. Not all madams were powerful, though. Some were former workers who transitioned to management for safety and less exhaustion, while others barely survived, dodging debt collectors and fines. The stereotype of the cruel, corset-clad tyrant is only half true. Many madams balance protecting their workers just enough to keep operations smooth without attracting accusations of running a disorderly house, which was bad for taxes. Pimps were grim enforcers rather than businessmen, using threats or violence to control workers and taking a cut of every transaction. In cities where prostitution was illegal, they doubled as bodyguards and jailers. Records from 14th century Barcelona reveal women testifying against pimps who branded them, locked them in rooms, or sold them between brothels. Some pimps disguised their operations as boarding houses, advertising laundry services or fortune-telling, with authorities often turning a blind eye unless someone influential complained. The line between pimp, manager, or landlord was blurry, with some men claiming they merely provided security for tenants who weren't allowed to leave. This ambiguity still confounds historians. Brothel power structures were complex, built on fear, necessity, manipulation, and just enough kindness to prevent rebellion. Some madams ruled with strict schedules. Others acted like tough, practical mothers, mending dresses, teaching negotiation, or reading fortunes during slow hours. A quirky tale from 15th century Prague describes a blind madam named Katka, who ran her brothel with uncanny precision, recognizing voices, tracking debts, and detecting fake coins by touch. Whether myth or fact, her story underscores what mattered most: control over space, bodies, and information. Madams and pimps knew city politics, secrets, and how to wield them, making their knowledge as valuable as gold in a world where priests and judges were regular clients. But power was precarious. A madam who grew too wealthy or outspoken risked ruin from a vengeful bishop or a jealous husband. Clients were another challenge. Madams managed them to ensure payment, prevent violence, and avoid inconvenient incidents, like the infamous Paris case where a nobleman died mid-encounter, requiring a discreet removal before the city watch arrived. The brothel was fined, the worker blamed, and the man given a Christian burial, showcasing medieval justice's absurdity. Brothels weren't chaotic dens of sin, but meticulous operations involving ledgers, bribery, and tense negotiations over rent and curtain cleaning. Behind the swagger and sermons, a brothel's ledger quietly balanced the night's transactions. As the sun rose over bustling streets, merchants shouted, fishmongers peddled dubious catches, and church bells rang out reminders of sin. Brothel windows creaked open, airing out the night's stale air, revealing velvet drapes, bright ribbons, and lingering gentlemen slinking away. But behind the facade was a gritty business of sex, driven by math and logistics. Prices varied by city, social class, and time of day. In a high-end London brothel, a full session with food and a bath might cost a silver groat, while in Prague's seedier quarters, a handful of copper coins, or even an onion, sufficed. Brothels displayed menus, sometimes painted on walls or sung by children outside, listing services like a toss in the hay for a loaf of bread and a shot of schnapps. Higher payments bought privacy, better wine, and cleaner sheets, though clean often meant the least stained option. Lower-paying clients got rough mattresses, shared benches, and no privacy, with madams timing sessions by hourglass. Rooms were damp, lice-ridden, with threadbare curtains and overflowing chamber pots. Lighting came from small, high windows called hag holes, offering little privacy from neighbors or stray geese. Hygiene was dismal. Sheets were rarely washed, bath water reused until it turned soupy, and workers relied on herbs, vinegar, or perfume to mask odors. Regulations in places like Lübeck and Vienna mandated weekly baths and clean linens, but clean was relative when straw mattresses doubled as rat nests. Tooth care involved chewing parsley or rubbing sage, though missing teeth were common enough that standards were low. Workers faced relentless physical and emotional tolls, with injuries, bruises, and no rest between clients. Most earnings went to madams, taxes, or pimps, leaving workers with barely enough for food or soap. Theft was rampant. Clients stole from workers, workers from clients, and court records recount men losing boots, purses, or even pants mid-session. In some brothels, workers wore ankle bells to time sessions, like jingling parking meters. The economy was both organized, with check-in hours and loyalty perks, and chaotic, varying by city and house. Nothing was easy or glamorous. Workers counted coins by candlelight, stitched dresses between shifts, and clung to survival. Clients came from all walks: merchants, knights, monks, students, and nobles in disguise. Brothels were social equalizers, where peasants and lords mingled, sometimes awkwardly in the same bed. Men arrived seeking escape from rigid roles, expecting beauty and obedience. Some were shy, others treated workers like objects, and a surprising number came to talk, cry, or drink, seeking emotional solace. Italian records describe workers valued as listeners, hearing tales of debts, feuds, or war traumas, leaving them emotionally drained. Sexual requests ranged from standard to bizarre, inspired by forbidden books or saints' paintings, with workers improvising through elaborate scenarios. Disease was a constant fear. Clients carried herbal charms or applied toxic concoctions like mercury paste, which caused boils or death. Condoms, made of vinegar-soaked linen or sheep gut, were rare and uncomfortable. Workers used sponges or wooden plugs for protection, driven by necessity rather than science. Knowledge of diseases like syphilis varied. Some saw them as divine punishment, others as bad air, but most clients ignored risks, assuming they'd be spared. Nobles paid for discreet entrances or kept mistresses, while rowdy university students caused chaos, quoting Aristotle while starting brawls. Violent or drunk clients faced bans or the stocks, but blacklists were hard to enforce when money was tight. Clients weren't just villains. They were trapped in a culture equating desire with shame, seeking escape from poverty, powerlessness, or loveless marriages. They brought coins and secrets, hoping to leave the latter behind the curtain. As night fell, candles lit the brothel, mixing beeswax with stale wine and cheap perfume. A nervous dread hung over the workers, not just from violent clients, but from disease, stigma, and exile. Medieval medicine, ignorant of germs, blamed illnesses on bad humors or miasmas, pointing fingers at brothels. By the late 14th century, cities like Florence and London enforced health inspections, where unqualified men scrutinized workers for sores or rashes in humiliating public displays. Infected women faced quarantine in pest houses, property seizure, or branding, with no compassion or effective treatment. Treatments were grim. Herbs, bleeding, or mercury ointments caused more harm than good. One Lubeck brothel's hygiene rules, like vinegar cloths and foot washing, outdid city infirmaries, but the madam was accused of witchcraft for her efforts. The system wasn't about healing but control, punishing workers rather than protecting them. Behind the brothel's velvet drapes lay a world of ledgers, fear, and fragile power, where survival demanded sharp wits, stitched dresses, and secrets kept or sold. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about when syphilis first appeared in Europe. Some argue it arrived from the Americas after Columbus' voyages, emerging around 1495. Others believe it existed earlier, misdiagnosed or cloaked in euphemisms like the French disease, the Neapolitan affliction, or the vivid burning joy. Historical records are murky, symptoms inconsistent, and few openly documented dying from such a stigmatized illness. What's undisputed is the scapegoating of brothel workers. They were the first blamed, punished, and least aided, despite clients spreading the disease like relentless vectors. Some cities forced visibly ill workers to wear bells in public, marking them as pariahs. Landlords refused them housing, markets banned them, and healers often rejected them as too sinful. Meanwhile, male clients faced minimal consequences. A Vienna nobleman who infected 14 women in a month paid only a fine, while the women faced eviction, branding, or exile. These policies failed to curb the disease, which spread through brothels, taverns, and homes. Fear of punishment drove secrecy. Workers hid symptoms, madams bribed inspectors, and clients lied about their health, perpetuating the cycle of denial, disguise, and decay. Yet brothel workers adapted, using herbal poultices of yarrow and marigold, sharing knowledge about rashes and fevers, and employing rudimentary condoms or strategic sick days to avoid risky clients. This woman-to-woman network operated beneath official oversight, a testament to their resilience in a system that profited from their labor while condemning them. Despite disease and stigma, brothels thrived because demand persisted, and the women had no choice but to keep working. As Vespers bells echo, a familiar figure, a clergyman, slips into the candlelit brothel, robes and all, carrying a suspiciously flask-shaped satchel. Medieval clergy were no strangers to brothels, despite vows of chastity. They visited as clients, landlords, or both, revealing a stark hypocrisy. The church condemned lust, but often profited from it. In London's Southwark, the Bishop of Winchester collected rent from brothels. In Avignon, priests frequented the brothel district, and bishops complained about monks smuggling women into cloisters. A 14th-century London friar, caught naked in a brothel during Lent, claimed he was offering confession, a weak excuse. Some clergy leased properties to madams, like a Cologne priest charging extra for backstair access. Punishments for such sins were light: fines, penance, or a quiet transfer, unless scandals became too public. In Florence, a friar fathered 6 children with a brothel worker, claiming she was a divine test. Even Pope Alexander VI's notorious appetites fueled calls to close brothels, though little changed. This hypocrisy extended to penitent houses in Spain, meant to reform prostitutes, but sometimes housing clergy concubines. Sermons railed against the sins priests committed hours earlier, yet the public looked away as long as sacraments continued. Brothel workers navigated this, some mocking clergy clients with winking father references, others finding them safer or wealthier patrons. Scholars debate whether the church ignored or rationalized these contradictions, but the evidence, rental contracts, court records, shows a system that profited from sin while preaching against it. Inside the brothel, a worn book lies open, not a Bible, but an erotic manual, its explicit drawings far from sermon-worthy. These texts, like the Speculum Maleficae or Mirror of Coition, detailed positions and techniques, blending pleasure with piety. Brothels used them for training or amusement, while workers memorized moves to satisfy clients. Aphrodisiacs, herbs like damiana or exotic spices, promised to heat the blood, often causing rashes more than arousal. Superstitions abounded. Herbs warded off spirits, talismans protected against disease, and beans, black for protection, red for passion, were carried as charms. Songs and limericks encoded techniques, passed down like tavern poetry. This knowledge was survival, helping workers stand out in a brutal system where refusal risked starvation. Scholars debate whether this empowered women or merely helped them endure exploitation. Likely both, as they navigated a world that demanded their compliance. The obsession with virginity was darker. Virginity was a commodity, fetishized as purity and worth, commanding high prices in brothels. Clients paid fortunes for the illusion of deflowering, often staged with fake blood or rehearsed shyness. Tragically, some girls, orphans or impoverished teens as young as 12, were genuinely virgins, sold into brutal transactions. A 15th-century Lion case describes a nobleman paying for an untouched girl who died from injuries. The brothel replaced her without consequence. Virginity defined a woman's legal and social value, yet its loss, real or perceived, rendered her disposable. Herbal remedies to restore virginity, like egg whites and rose petals, reflected desperate hopes to reclaim worth. For some clients, taking virginity was about domination, not desire, with reluctance prized as part of the act. Historians debate whether this virgin economy was mostly staged or genuinely destructive. Likely, it was both, with real harm cloaked in performance. Queerness existed in the shadows of brothels, rarely recorded but undeniable. Women formed romantic and sexual bonds, sharing beds and lives in emotional households. Letters reveal longing, like one Avignon woman's note about rosemary in memory. These relationships offered comfort and protection, though discovery risked violence or worse. Some brothels tolerated same-sex intimacy if it didn't disrupt business. One Frankfurt brothel featured women performing together for clients, where real desire sometimes sparked. Male same-sex encounters were riskier, often involving coerced boys or hidden meetings in cities like Venice. A Florence case describes a worker, Giuliano, arrested for sodomy, but declaring love for his partner. Gender non-conforming individuals, dressing or presenting outside norms, existed too, celebrated by some clients, ridiculed by others. Secret codes, like a red sash or subtle gesture, connected this underground network. Despite brutal punishments, floggings, burnings, queer love persisted in stolen moments, a defiance of a world demanding conformity. Royalty added spectacle to brothel life. Kings and nobles, like Edward IV of England or Charles VI of France, visited openly, sometimes with entourages of musicians and jesters. These visits were about power, not necessity, with extra guards ensuring privacy. Edward's rumored cloak left in a bathhouse and Charles's fiery pagan reenactment gone wrong highlight their recklessness. For workers, royal clients brought wealth, but danger, pregnancy, disgrace, or threats from jealous courtiers. These visits were less transactions than performances of dominance, leaving women to navigate the fleeting rewards and lasting risks. By morning, the brothel quiets. Windows open, blankets air out, and a girl sits silently, hollow-eyed. The inn, its chaos, disease, hypocrisy, survival, and secret loves, lingers in the air. Yet the world keeps turning, coins change hands, and the women carry on, their resilience etched into every worn floorboard and whispered strategy. Medieval brothels, royalty, espionage, and witchcraft. Let's dive deeper into the shadowy world of medieval brothels, where the stakes weren't just coins but crowns, secrets, and lives. Picture a notorious case in Bohemia. A brothel worker rises to become the king's mistress, only to be accused of witchcraft by his advisors eager to remove her. She's executed, and the king weds another within a month. Royals weren't always kind clients either. Power bred cruelty. Some demanded multiple women, exotic acts, or left workers beaten, scarred, or worse. Justice? A cruel joke. You couldn't sue a nobleman. In their eyes, you were the crime. Yet for some women, a royal visit was a rare chance. A year's earnings, or a favor to cash in later. Clever madams flattered royal egos, securing guards or tax breaks with a wink. Your Highness, your name would never be sullied here. Loyalty came wrapped in lace and discretion. In 15th century Milan, Duke Filippo Maria Visconti built a private brothel inside his castle, complete with themed rooms and a Latin menu for elegance. One room, the Room of Silence, demanded wordless desire, some say for power, others because he hated small talk. Brothels near royal courts were often controlled by insiders, a noble cousin investing, a former mistress running the show, debts paid by a grateful baron. Rumors swirled of brothel networks in Paris and Naples tied to noble families, used not just for pleasure but for politics. A duke might invite a rival to a brothel, ensuring eavesdroppers caught every word, or a sketch artist hid in a laundry basket. Pillow talk could topple thrones. During tense times, royal visits dropped, not from newfound morality, but paranoia. No king wanted to be caught vulnerable mid-coup, unless it was his coup. Reputation mattered. Too many brothel visits sparked scandal. None at all raised eyebrows. In Spain, some rulers hid their tracks, while a French prince embraced his sins, only to fall off a brothel balcony. Divine timing, perhaps. So, when you hear of medieval kings and their courtly pursuits, picture uneven floors, itchy beds, and a woman named Lettuce or Gertrude scrambling for her earring before guards burst in. Royalty wasn't above the game. They were the game, and everyone else just tried not to lose. The brothel grows tense one morning after a raucous night. Workers exchange quick glances, one hiding a bruise no one mentions. The madam reaches for her special bottle, reserved for trouble. Beneath the wine and perfume lies a colder, sharper truth, intelligence. Not book smarts, espionage. Brothels were spy hubs, where sex, gossip, and treason mingled like candles, wine, and regret. Drunk nobles, scheming merchants, and loose-lipped clergy made these places perfect listening posts. Want to know who's funding a rebellion or sleeping with whose wife? Bribe the right madam. Brothel workers had a superpower, invisibility. Ignored by clients, they heard everything. Names, alliances, the weight of coin pouches. Some had near-photographic memories. Others teased out secrets with a smile. Tell me about your voyage, sweet lord. What upset you? It felt like flirting, not interrogation. Madams collected these crumbs, keeping ledgers doubling as blackmail dossiers. In 14th century Florence, a madam named Tessadiata was arrested for possessing coded letters tied to a noble uprising. She claimed ignorance, but admitted passing them to a foreign visitor for gold. Spy, informant, or pawn. Her brothel hosted rival meetings before a failed assassination. Coincidence? The court didn't think so. Some workers were planted spies, like Helen in a Brussels brothel under Charles the Bold, tasked with watching envoys for trade or troop gossip. Brothels also spread disinformation, a staged conversation to trick a rival into believing a fake plot. Jesters, too, doubled as informants, steering talks to dangerous topics during brothel visits. In 15th century Lubeck, a rumored tunnel linked a brothel to a merchant hall, moving messages unseen, denied by the city, but a bricked-over passage found in 1892 makes you wonder. Coded messages hid in bread loaves, corset stitches, or flower arrangements. A red tulip signaled safety. A black poppy warned of enemies. Scholars debate if this espionage was organized or opportunistic, but brothels were dangerous because someone was always listening. By dusk, a storm rolls in, bruised clouds heavy with fear. Rain taps the brothel's windows, candles flickering. The mood is quiet, watchful, as workers whisper about a widow dragged away for cursing a cow, or maybe a magistrate's son. Someone screamed witch, and that was enough. Brothel workers were prime targets when witch-hunting fever gripped Europe. Already outsiders, they lived beyond marriage, knew herbs, and wielded charms that seemed like spells. When crops failed or babies died, they were blamed. The clergy and inquisitors saw sinful women as one step from demonic. Take Marriott of Lyon, arrested in 1457 for selling love sachets, rosemary, mint, poppy seeds. When a noble's husband fell ill after visiting her, the sachets became demonic enchantments. Tortured, she confessed and was executed. The noblewoman, sporting a new lover and necklace, moved on. In early 1600s Würzburg, brothel workers were accused of turning into cats to spy. Hilda's serpent-shaped mole sealed her fate, burned without remorse. Torture forced confessions, sparking chain reactions. One name led to another. Brothels, where women shared secrets and herbs, were easy targets. Their control over bodies and information terrified the powerful, so they burned them down, literally. Some workers destroyed their charms to avoid suspicion. Others leaned in, charging extra for magical services, wearing black veils or claiming spirit connections. In Transylvania, a madam styled herself a moon priestess, running candlelit rituals, blasphemy, or marketing. She outlasted most until an inquisitor drowned clutching her herbs. Were brothel workers witch-hunt scapegoats, or did records exaggerate? Some say society projected fears of female power onto them. Others see a literal overlap. Either way, brothels were battlegrounds where secrets, sex, and survival clashed, and the women paid the price. As you linger in the brothel's fading light, see beyond the beds, the hidden ledgers, the servant memorizing faces, the madam's victorious glance. Every whisper had a price, every secret a weapon. In a world of lies, the truth was the most dangerous currency of all. In medieval Europe, brothel workers were often targeted as outsiders, with trial records revealing a pattern of persecution against those defying traditional gender roles. They were frequently labeled witches, a charge that required little more than a rumor or a hint of too much knowledge. In Catholic Europe and even Islamic Spain, brothels were linked to magic and corruption, with authorities dubbing women sorceresses of the gate. Folktales warned of men being charmed into ruin by women with cinnamon scents and unblinking eyes. Fear masked as morality, control as protection. For brothel workers, merely existing placed them halfway to the stake. As dawn broke, rain left silver puddles in the streets, and the brothel prepared for another day. Workers readied for baths, or at least the appearance of bathing, ushering us into the steamy overlap of cleanliness and sex. The medieval bathhouse, often just a brothel with soap. Contrary to myths, medieval people valued bathing when affordable, and public bathhouses were common. By the 13th century, the line between bathhouse and brothel blurred. In a 14th century Vienna bathhouse, steam carried scents of lavender, pine, and lye soap. Attendants, often women called bayeuresses in France, started by scrubbing backs, but could be paid for more, from ego-stroking to outright sex. Bathhouses often held dual licenses for bathing and accompanying services, advertised with paintings of nude couples or cross towels tied with red string. In cities like Paris and Prague, Bathhouses offered packages: a soak, shave, meal, and companion. The church condemned them, preaching against moral decay, but laws separating bathhouses from brothels were ignored. In Cologne, a ban on acts of delight in the water was sidestepped by placing tubs behind potted plants. Tubs were wooden barrels, water growing grim by night's end, with lye soap and egg yolk shampoo. Health regulations, like London's vinegar scrubbing mandate or Florence's time limit of 1 Our Father and 2 Hail Marys, were loosely enforced. Some bathhouses had steam closets for spiritual sweats, doubling as discreet rendezvous spots. Scholars debate whether bathhouses were respectable or outright brothels, but their architecture, narrow hallways, curtain alcoves, enabled discreet vice, making them social hubs where deals, gossip, and lives intertwined. By the late 1500s, stricter laws pushed bathhouses to fully embrace sex work or clothes. Yet, for centuries, they offered a space where nudity wasn't judged until the water cooled. Fashion, too, played a complex role in brothel life. Sumptuary laws forced sex workers to wear distinctive clothing, like yellow sashes, striped hoods, or mismatched shoes, to mark them as dishonest. In London, veils were banned. In Venice, pearls were forbidden. Yet, workers turned stigma into spectacle, wearing bold yellow gloves or fake pearls to draw attention and coin. Madams donned silks and gold, their outfits armor against scorn. In Augsburg, workers in crimson gowns were arrested at a church parade but reclaimed their confiscated dresses in court. During festivals, some cities allowed extravagant dress to boost the city's image, turning shame into strategy. Clothing was currency and protection, with workers keeping plain outfits for emergencies. Historians debate whether these outfits were pure stigma or symbols of pride. Some noble women copied brothel styles, sparking scandals, while workers were denied burial in fine garments they'd earned. Fashion was survival, performance, and rebellion. Economically, brothels were small businesses with madams managing workers, cooks, guards, and suppliers. Taxes were steep, funding city works like roads and guild halls. In Suffolk, stew money was a budget line. Nuremberg had a pleasure tax. Condemned coins and tokens offered discretion, while ledgers tracked every transaction. Workers kept little aftercuts to madams, guards, and taxes, often trapped in debt cycles. In Spain, taxes were paid in oil or cloth, feeding orphans indirectly. The broader economy thrived on brothels, from flower sellers to apothecaries peddling stamina potions. Yet tension simmered. Brothel riots, driven by class resentment rather than morality, erupted when the poor saw workers with better clothes or food. In 1391 Paris, women stormed a brothel over a worker's fine dress. In Norwich, a 1450 riot over bread prices burned a brothel down. Workers sometimes rioted too, like in 1505 Nuremberg, protesting curfews, or in Prague, where a bishop's license revocation sparked a petition and alehouse brothels. Riots didn't end the trade. It adapted, moving to cellars or boats. Brothels hired guards, but fires, accidental or vengeful, were common, like a Bordeaux blaze from a student brawl or a Bruges riot sparked by a goose-related scuffle. These weren't just outbursts. They were resistance against inequality, leaving scars but never killing the trade. Brothels always returned, driven by hunger, power, and escape. The madam paces, her keys jangling at her hip. Outside, a patrol shuffles past. Uniformed men with torches, faces grim. They're not here for pleasure or coin, but for law, or its semblance, which spells danger in a place like this. Brothels existed under the shadow of legal control, a contradictory dance of regulation and condemnation. Prostitution was often illegal yet tolerated, even licensed, in cities like Amsterdam or Cologne. Rules were strict. No soliciting outside, no married women working, no services on holy days unless a client was persuasive. Brothels had to stay clean, orderly, and discreet. Inspectors checked bedding, ledgers, and workers, fining madams for underage or injured girls, but rarely closing houses if taxes were paid and scandals stayed quiet. Still, the threat of punishment loomed. Workers faced fines, jail, or public flogging for vague charges like disorderly conduct, talking back, fighting, or wearing the wrong shoes. Some endured humiliating penance processions, barefoot with shaved heads, or were sent to brutal correctional houses disguised as reform schools. In early 1400s Avignon, a worker named Beatrice was whipped and sent to a monastery for mocking a cardinal's impotence. She escaped disguised as a nun. Financial penalties were common too. Unpaid debts could bar women from other work, or a habitual harlot label could lead to banishment. Show trials targeted brothels to distract from larger scandals, like a Milan magistrate who, accused of embezzlement, claimed a brothel housed a demonic circle. 4 women were arrested, 2 imprisoned without trial, 1 vanished while he kept his job. Smart madams worked the system, bribing officials or tracking their preferences in favor books for leverage. Cities needed brothels to contain male appetites, preferring regulated sin to chaos. Crackdowns were often performative, burning one house while others opened nearby. Scholars debate whether brothels were truly legal or merely tolerated, but the law used women without protecting them. In Southwark, London, brothels paid rent to the Bishop of Winchester, their workers dubbed Winchester Geese, yet were buried outside consecrated ground, caught in a system that both sustained and trapped them. As the patrol passes and the madam relaxes, the brothel persists, balanced on survival and silence. By morning, a stolen loaf appears, a girl hums while scrubbing wine stains, and life continues. But death was ever present. Sex work was perilous. Violence, disease, and infection from untreated wounds were constant threats. Childbirth was another. Contraception like herbal brews or vinegar-soaked pouches often failed. Pregnant workers faced harsh choices: hide it, flee, or risk death in childbirth. When a worker died, cities offered no honors. Denied church burial, they were laid in unmarked graves, like Southwark's Crossbones graveyard. A 1389 Bruges record notes a woman who died after being locked with a violent client. Her body was buried at night with a single candle, her name unrecorded. Some brothels kept secret plots, marked only by rosemary or lavender. During plagues, brothels suffered. Close quarters and shared linens spread disease fast. In Avignon, one brothel lost all but one worker, Agnes, who left a carved note, "God forgive us all." Yet community thrived. Women cared for each other, sharing quiet comfort, holding vigil for the sick, or mourning with small rituals. A candle left burning, wine poured on the ground, a cross over a grave. Scholars debate whether these acts were common or rare, but traces remain. Unmarked graves, ledger notes, a rose bush no one planted. Clients rarely mourned, moving on to younger faces, leaving the dead forgotten. Aging was another slow death. Sex work offered no retirement. By their 30s, workers were past their prime, as clients craved youth. Becoming a madam was the best path. Tough, connected women who learned the trade and seized control. Others took hidden roles like cleaning or cooking, or left to peddle herbs or marry for shelter. Some drifted, like a Lubeck woman who joined actors at 38, buried later under an apple tree with a wine bottle headstone. Older workers faced mockery or were pushed out, starved of clients. Brothels prioritized young faces, relegating veterans to backrooms. Yet some resisted, offering companionship over novelty, charging more for listening than acrobatics. In Rouen, Colette, the oldest lover in France, wore black veils and charged double, mentoring younger workers like an unofficial mother. Scholars debate how many aged out versus vanished, but the silence of their erasure lingers. Brothels weren't built for old age, consuming youth and moving on. Yet some women clung to dignity, whispering, "Still here." When nobles visited, the brothel transformed. Candles lit, wine uncorked, the newest girl scrubbed clean despite her fear. Nobles, from kings to knights, came for spectacle, not secrecy, often with entourages. They paid generously, sometimes in favors, protecting brothels from fines or raids. But their power was a double-edged sword. A noble's whim could close a house, as in 1434 Florence, where a duke's gossip sparked a raid, the madam arrested, and a servant vanished. Nobles demanded control, outfits, scripts, even cruelty. Workers couldn't easily refuse men who could ruin them. Some women turned this to their advantage, becoming confidants or brokering peace, like Paris Isabeau, who mediated between lords before disappearing. Nobles shaped trends, lip paint, silk, languages, while impostors with fake crests were fleeced by savvy madams. Noble visits brought opportunity and terror, their power reshaping the house with every step. The brothel carries ghosts, not spectral, but human. The girl who worked disguised as a boy, remembered only by a blue ribbon. The woman who saved coins and fled with a scribe, her ledger marked paid in full. The man who brought wooden birds, mourned with a candle when he vanished. A raid left a scorch mark and a girl, Anna, lost to smoke. A red string on the door, tied after a violent night, signals safety or danger. These stories linger in rituals, songs, and names scratched into beams. Some say brothels hold a living memory, their walls absorbing pain and defiance. Scholars call it superstition or nostalgia, but the coins under mattresses and untouched furniture suggest otherwise. The brothel remembers its own, the workers who laughed, loved, and didn't make it out. The house quiets as doors bolt and a lone candle flickers. The echo remains, survival in silk and sarcasm, power in defiance. The medieval brothel was a stage, shelter, trap, and home, where women carved space in a world that gave them none. Laughter was a weapon, every flirt a calculation, and the past never left. As you sit with its ghosts, the city sleeps, and the brothel's heartbeat pulses on.